not even my academy yet. Life is fun.
You're a role player now, son.
Yeah, we role play.
Yeah, because I already looked at this.
We LARP.
Do you have a frequency yet?
Fuck yeah, it is. Yeah. That thing you said.
A walkable soy boy.
That's fine. Is that train crashing or is that thing
go.
done?
Put it back. Actually,
Last night.
Okay, so we're doing that. Is that the apple brandy? And then we top it off with full throttle. Because the thing is, if we crack the full throttle, we need to pour it all in.
you got room.
Okay.
Good. I'm more
Full
gloves.
throttle is amazing.
It really is. You don't find it very often, very anywhere. Like outside of like.
I have it in Kroger.
Some Krogers do, or at least they used to be like. The Kroger near me used to have it like on sale.
Which would be like during
the Worthington one.
We have Brock.
The big one.
That should be like our recruiting.
It's the Merc potion.
Well, it's like last time we had all the hats. Now we have alcohol.
I'll be the potion sommelier here.
Who's listening to fucking that song?
Dang!
That's
good.
Is your radio on?
And he had a radio. He's listening to sports show. Yeah.
So, after reading those stories, we went to sleep. Seth and Ben had sleeping bags. I had a military cot Chelsea's grandpa slept on at war. She told me to bring extra blankets because of how cold the area underneath the cot gets. Like, having that space underneath the cot will attract cold. I ignored her and regretted it dearly. I ended up sleeping in the car because it was just too cold, but not before setting off the car alarm and freaking out like 40 people. The morning was easier than I thought it would be, considering how shitty my sleep was, and the same thing was true for everyone else. We just kind of got up and were like, hey, we're fine, okay. But it's time to explain the story and the rules of Enter the Wasteland. The premise is that nukes went off, and the American government basically fell, and America is now a wasteland. Civilized society has mostly evaporated, and reading the rules and the script, I was really starting to question how much role-playing is there. And as Seth put it, you get into it what you get out of it what you put into it. It really allowed players the freedom to get into character and just shoot stuff. You know, it was really up to you, as you'll see. As the American government fell, a few factions started popping up. American civilians were the main group to try to establish order. The civvies were remnants of the fallen American government that established settlements. All types were welcome with the civvies. Country folk, city folk, 3%ers. Story-wise, they had manpower, but the least training. Game-wise, it's bring your own guns and skills, so that didn't matter. They recruited free players, like crazy, which makes sense story-wise. They ran a government of a small, direct democracy. The civvies were marked with white tape. But the bombs that fell came from somewhere. The foreign invading army. Because America nuked the invading communist army in retaliation, their invasion was far from perfect. But they had numbers on par with civvies, but better training, despite being stretched thin due to supply lines. They wanted to topple the remaining civilians and put them under communist rule. However, that doesn't mean much in the post-apocalypse because they were essentially just a dictatorial force. While not spelled out story-wise, most of the players, were white in the game. It is implied, however, that the invading army was a coalition of communist forces from Asia and Europe. The major conflict in the story was between the yellow invading army and the white civilian population. And when I say yellow, I don't mean skin color. I mean, that's the tape that they had. Next, we have the most hated faction by everyone, Scavs. Scavengers are story-wise, at best, just scavengers, but realistically, they're raiders, evil, lawless scum that in part 1 of the game had a nasty habit of recruiting free travelers at gunpoint. This gave them a heavy presence with which they harassed everyone in the game. The red tape scavs are your thieves, your rapists, your marauders, though obviously that's all story-wise, that's not happening for real. Thank heavens. Every faction had reason story-wise and gameplay-wise to hate the scavs, and from first contact with everyone in the every other faction we met, we exchanged 4 words immediately: shoot scavs on sight. The response would always be a thumbs up. Then outside of factions, there were just role players and travelers. Travelers would be recruited into factions with tape held by faction commanders when both parties agreed. So a person would be traveling through. If they saw a faction that seemed friendly, they could join up if the faction leader would let them. And it was kind of like a dick move if you're like, no, you can't join our faction. It's kind of like not letting the person get picked in gym. It's like, don't do that. Role players couldn't officially join any faction and served to push the story along as quasi-quest givers, like you would see in Fallout or something, but also players in their own right. Lastly, there was our faction, Mercs. Scavs were hated by everyone, but everyone had reason to be on our good side, at least at first. Blue tape mercenaries were exactly what you think, guns for hire. We would be tasked with anything because we were essentially another standing army, roughly the size of the other 3 factions. We could easily tip the balance in the favor any direction, so we inadvertently kind of became a sort of peacekeeping force in the wastes. And we roleplayed the shit out of being hired guns. Money, 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 motherfucker. Money was our thing. We were all about the goals, never about the ethics. And my character was about the ethics, and that was kind of like an internal struggle. So again, it's like you get out of it what you put into it. And while that didn't come up much in terms of gameplay, role-playing that myself, kind of having problems with management, was a real fun thing for me. In fact, everyone did a great job at role-playing, like from top to bottom. It wasn't what I was expecting. Like, how do you role-play a military situation? How do you role-play a military simulation? It started to make sense once you actually get into it. It wasn't about character sheets, builds, or specs, or even names. It was about lingo and goals. It was about creating a dramatic story together. And it was less about the individual. And when you think about LARPing, you always think about, or role-playing altogether, you think about the individual. But these are armies, so it's not about the individual. We all had backstories, and they did come into play in some ways. But just like in real war, you role-play, you play a role in a greater army, a greater purpose. I joke, but it was a tense scenario with a lot of heartbreak and interesting motivations, as you'll see as we get into the story. Anyway, rules and goals. Everyone was required to load up their weapons to capacity. No free BBs could be taken, only what you could fit into your magazines, or whatever was, whatever your ammunition thing was. It's like if it was a shotgun shell that you load up with BBs or whatever. Small amounts of extra BBs were out in the waste to loot. While I see what the game runners were attempting in practice, this meant nothing. Everyone had so many backup magazines. I mean, these people waste a lot of money on this hobby. With such high capacities of ammunition, running out wasn't realistically in the cards. And lootable BBs were in such small supply that they didn't matter. I initially thought that they were going to be a death trap. Everyone was going to rush for them, and that would turn into a bloodbath. I was wrong. No one gave a shit, because, the practical reasons I'm spelling out. No one went to war over them. Every player was to carry 5 lootable items, including a playing card given out, that had a gameplay purpose I'll get into in a bit. Snack items were brought by players. I brought a bunch of snacks for everyone. So, like, if people would kill me, they would be able to loot snacks off my body. extra BBs, health bandages used to revive players, and even backstory notes like you see in Fallout and similar RPGs. Upon killing a person, if you could make it to their corpse, you could loot one item off of them. White civvies and yellow invaders had a series of control points as poles. Each side of the pole had either yellow or white tape on it. Their goal was to get the most points for the most amount of time by having the poles flipped in their favor. Scavengers had the goal of controlling the main town area, which they had trouble accessing, an area that white and yellow could hold very easily. Mercs needed to get playing cards off of dead players. The higher the card value, the higher the rank of the player in their faction, and the more points it was worth to us. Mind you, all of this is just very loose, kind of judged very loosely. Whoever's doing their goal the best. White civvies respawned if not healed by bandages on one side of the playing area, yellow invaders on the opposite side, and scavs could go anywhere outside the game area to respawn. Mercs had a blue respawn flag. No matter where it was, we could respawn there. Respawn happens after leaving your corpse in one place for 10 minutes. Then you walk to your respawn area. Now, you're back in the game. Here's where the game starts. In our position, far outside of the town, we received suggestive instructions over the walkie-talkies on a private channel to make contact with the civvies. This was only the start of the game, and from then on, walkies were to only call out real-world problems, like if a fucking bear shows up or someone breaks their leg. They were just used for communication at that point. Outside of that, no more suggestions via walkie-talkies. No one could talk with walkie-talkies. That technology was destroyed and not able to be repaired during the nuclear fallout and everything. To avoid people looting our playing cards back off of us, we hid out in a bush, this gun case where we would keep everything under camouflage. And we took to a final collective swig from our Merc potion before moving into town, hoping to make contact with the civvies. As we approached, we indeed saw that they had rushed to claim the town. The invading army backed off, knowing the town was better off in the hands of the civvies than it was in the evil scavs. Upon being in shouting distance, Commander Ben yelled, "Shoot scavs on sight." You already know what happened. The democratically elected mayor of the civvies continued walking forward while giving us a thumbs up. As we got close, the mayor sent a messenger to us as we did have our weapons drawn. We are defensive. We made an agreement within 30 seconds with this messenger and parted ways. The terms were simple. We both shoot scavs on sight. We flip poles white for the civvies. As we see them, civvies collect yellow playing cards, and in the end, we do need all playing cards. Understood? Understood. Boom, we parted ways. This is when I began to understand just how much politicking we would be doing. Because originally, dressed in dress clothing the first time we played this, because that's how we normally dress, my character was dubbed the Professor, a rogue scholar that read about times before the bombs went off. The Professor dreamed about bygone ages when there were libraries and organized society. He saw the democracy of the civvies and admired it. And this was the character I was role-playing, and that's when I got excited. I'm like, yes! Okay, now I understand what the role-playing is. Eventually, we ran into a group of yellow invaders, but rather than acting aggressively, it seems that they wanted to talk. We heard them out. The agreement we made with the civvies, if we chose to keep it, didn't involve us aggressing on yellows, just flipping the poles white. So, parlaying with them, we found out their current goal. Turned out that 2 of their men got caught by civvies and were being held prisoner inside one of the main buildings in town. They wanted to broker a peace deal, a trade of some kind, but had no bargaining chips at the moment. war was at a standstill for a good while. During this time, we picked off a few scavs and recruited a few people, a lone wanderer in NCR clothing from Fallout, and one rando. We established a formation and headed back into town after depositing a few cards and having our new members drink from the Merc Potion. But the mood of the town had all changed when we returned. There had been some sort of skirmish we hadn't seen. Yellow invaders had attempted to attack on the town, and while they withstood the minor assault, it was a political shakeup. The mayor, the man in a business suit, he was in the leadership role. His leadership had been questioned. Being a direct democracy, a more aggressive military leader proposed revenge. This new guy was young and somewhat timid from what we had observed before, but it seemed odd that he was gaining so much traction. He wasn't particularly charismatic. We witnessed the vote go down via raised hands. Leadership changed hands to the hot-headed young guy we'll call White Scarf. His scarf was actually black, but he is the leader of the White Civvies, so yeah. The prof, myself, witnessed this and wept for democracy failing. We needed to keep the town safe from scavs, and the attacking yellows would only cause more harm than good. Attacking the yellows would only cause more harm than good. The defense was working, but Commander Ben saw the benefit of conflict. He thought the area secure as long as both forces held it, mercs and civvies. He might have been right, but something stank about the situation. But I didn't know what. The prof couldn't question the commander's orders, however. While in town, we met some free agents and role players, a messenger armed with only a holstered pistol and a mailbag, a small 3-person sect of Cthulhu cultists that refused to join any factions because becoming political would hinder the reach of their religion. We argued that they needed a home for asylum, an army to defend their freedoms, suggesting that they talk to the new civvy leader. They weighed the costs and benefits and decided against it. They did, however, convert Lieutenant Sepp to their religion. They had a religious ceremony in the town hall. Seth was asked to repeat a mantra written in the language of the Old Ones from a book of the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft. They think without warning him when they busted a paintball over his head so that he may know the startling gooey feeling of their Lord Cthulhu's embrace. Just as we were starting to go grab the spawn flag that we had to place it next to the town as a show of good faith to the civvies, invaders showed up spanning a wide area. They were coming from a good 200 degrees of rotation area towards the town. Our lone wanderer and one of Ben's friends had excellent sniping gear, however. That is insanely expensive. I have no idea why they invested in this. That mostly left us to deal with one choke point. Bearing down. God damn it, Brandon Reed. I took some time to peek out and get a few shots off. It was at this time that I surprised myself and everyone again by scoring a kill before getting killed. There was a rather large gap from the shot that I made too, and I managed to revive a few people that got shot around me with some bandages and pull them out of the boondoggle with some cover fire. I was pretty badass. It was the only other time that I would be badass throughout the entire game. That group of yellows got the hint and started to back off, but we heard shots from the opposite direction. We assumed it was the scavs teaming up with the invaders in an attempt to take the town. We were wrong. It was more invaders, but they claimed to come in peace. None of them fired. It was the civvies that sensibly shot first. We arrived to see White Scarf doing a poor job of discussing the situation with the still alive and surrendered yellow invaders. Commander Ben stepped in to further peace talks. Turns out that the yellow invaders got cut off into 2 groups by the scavs at the beginning of the game. The whole game, invaders had been trying to group up. So one group of invaders had their leadership structure, the other group didn't. The Yellows we had been fighting had been gone rogue. White Scarf had shot the Yellow invaders under the leadership of Comrade Yellow. I don't actually know the name of the dude, but he was leading the Yellow army, so Comrade Yellow it is. Yellow couldn't talk because he was dead, as you do, but lower-level soldiers told the story. Ben negotiated peace. We released the remaining Yellow soldiers under the condition that the firefight be forgiven, and the message relayed to the rogue Yellow army that attacking the town is not okay. The former mayor was clearly upset that it took Commander Ben to broker this deal, or maybe he was upset that a private business like us was controlling what was once a thriving democracy, or maybe he was just mad that he lost power. But man, he was a sourpuss. I'm not sure if that was real or role-playing, but it was entertaining nonetheless. But I was left pondering the tragedy that had transpired. Innocent men killed by the actions of a rogue state. It also meant that I had to ponder hierarchy. I need to have Commander Ben's leadership, but I knew, disagreement or not, that would eventually cause issues. Without leadership, the rogue Yellow invaders attacked without provocation. All they gained were dead men. I figured they attacked because they lacked leadership. Eventually, I learned otherwise. This was then when the Vault Dwellers approached the town. They had 2 scavs at gunpoint. They heard word about the town's jail and wanted protection from the outside forces in exchange for bringing 2 scavs to justice. White Scarf liked the idea of having prisoners as a deterrent. The jail was empty after we let out the Yellow invaders, after all. Our renewed enemies were the scavs. The former mayor knew the scavs' mindset, however. For one, they're dangerous to have around, declawed or not. And 2, they'll attack with no regard for hostages. White Scarf held a vote. The Vault Dwellers were given shelter, but no resources. The scav hostages became prisoners. Not long after this, we met Blackbeard. Blackbeard was a role player that the civvies had met. We hadn't, however. Story-wise, he was a weapons dealer, but obviously he wasn't actually dealing weapons mid-game, though that'd be hella cool. He asked for a private meeting with Commander Ben, Seth, and myself. We took to a private room while other mercs stood guard for privacy. He explained the scavs and the Yellow invaders had an agreement of some sort. Neither would win without civvies and mercs being out of the town. And this was factually true. He explained that there were mounting forces, with the scavs recruiting all kinds of free agents, and the Yellow invaders bringing out new weapons that they hadn't put on the field yet. According to him, Yellow invaders had some sort of ace up their sleeve, and shit was about to get real dangerous, especially against a weak leader like White Scarf. Considering he was in the business of killing, selling guns, and we were good for business, he wanted us alive. So he told us to leave the town of our own accord. We had Blackbeard leave while we discussed our options. We knew for a fact Yellow invaders had bigger guns. We had seen them the night before camping out, and we also knew that they hadn't mounted a full-scale attack yet. Along with that, we knew scavs didn't care for their own lives. If they suicided, respawned with their easier respawns, and had Yellow invaders take the town and hold it while they got back, that could spell disaster. But, something was fishy about Blackbeard. He was in talks with everyone as a gun merchant, and could have really wanted us safe, or he wanted us out of the picture. We also weren't sure that Yellow invaders even had time to regroup properly to establish order, and, make this alliance. But then again, maybe it was just one half of the Yellow army making an alliance with the scavs, leadership or rogue state. Ben wanted to play it safe, and go back on our deal with the civvies quietly, get out of town, and make contact with another faction to back up Blackbeard's claims. Seth thought that Blackbeard was pulling some scare tactics with an ulterior motive to get us out of the town, to leave the civvies defenseless weak, and defenseless would be an overstatement. I wasn't sure what to think. I shared Seth's skepticism, but a desire for survival told me to heed the warning. I suggested a vote. We took a vote. Again, my character, huge fan of democracy. I voted for staying, but Ben's side won the vote. We all slipped out. We all sipped from the Merc potion and started Operation Fuck Whitey. We turned out of town and set up base in a newly heavily forested area. It wasn't a defensible spot, but it was out of view of the town, but we could see the town. It was hard for them to see us, but we could see them pretty easily. We were also rather hidden from most routes, so we could just observe. In this time, we split into two groups, Town Recon and Faction Recon. No matter who was right, we all agreed we needed intel badly. Ben placed myself, Seth, and the Lone Wanderer outside of the town, while he and the rest went out of town to see if they could find other faction leaders, hopefully scavs, to see if they would shoot on sight. Seth wanted to stay in town. He was, this was our compromise. He didn't want to see his fellow Cthulhu cultists cut down. I didn't want further invasion by the Yellows, much less the scavs. I knew full well business could, ruin something great. That's how the bombs came falling down, as far as we know. But ultimately, competition is key to survival. So my sympathies were with the civvies, not the invading, tyrannical yellow invaders. My sympathies were with the civvies, but not necessarily my guns. After some time, Rick and Morty made their first appearance in the game, entering the town along with white-taped, civilians, fellows that had been out on patrol alone. Rick and Morty looked off instantly. I didn't trust them from how they held their guns. Seth and I decided to take a look at the situation close up and not just through binoculars. After getting within earshot, we heard how White Scarf had been running things. Not well without Ben's advice. He couldn't manage both wanting to go out for war and needing to hold down the town. We approached Rick and Morty to see what they wanted with the town. We didn't get a straight answer, and that was fucking weird, because how hard is it to answer, business or pleasure, whatever? Why couldn't they answer that question? They claimed to be scientists at one point. They claimed to be passing through at other points. We figured they wanted to collect info for a rival faction and report back. The civvies were always too trusting, and the civvy, recon that found them and brought them to town, we think that they were just being foolish. Had Commander Ben been around, we would have maybe suggested taking Rick and Morty to jail for interrogation to White Scarf, but White Scarf wasn't likely to honor Seth or I's suggestion, especially with Mercs pulling out of the town. He did notice. Also, if Ben had been around, I would have suggested recruiting Rick and Morty just to see if they'd pledge to stick with us. But Seth and I had seen enough. We pulled out of town, but not before Seth wizened up his fellow cultist to the potential danger. They stuck around temporarily, but planned on leaving should shit go south. But there was one reliable exit out of town for a small group of people like them. We felt that they were relatively safe. Relatively. Blackbeard appeared in the town talking to both the former mayor and White Scarf. Something stank for sure, and Seth and I agreed not to believe a single goddamn thing that came out of his mouth from then on out. Ben arrived back and gave us a brief rundown of what we needed to know. Not how he knew it. He said there was no time, and there really wasn't. Just what we needed to know. That we needed to oppose the civvies when the time came, but still protect the town from the scavs if possible. We were getting ready to back up further away from the town to a more visible but further away safe outpost when gunfire started popping off. Rick and Morty opened fire in the town. After the fact, we found out that 7 or 8 people had been taken out by this. In the confusion, the civvies thought that we had opened fire, or that we suggested this, or whatever. We got into a small, long-range engagement that resulted in some overzealous mercs going into the town for revenge after the civvies popped a few of us. We went into the town for backup, and then divided into 2 parts. The town got divided into 2 parts. By sheer accident, we ended up claiming half the town. Mind you, the civvies were extremely weakened at the moment due to the terrorist attack by Rick and Morty, whatever the fuck their motivation was. Radical atheist scientists? I don't know what their motivation was, but it was funny that it happened. And low-key, it totally was Seth that was like, hey, you gotta roleplay fucking crazy people if you're gonna cosplay crazy people. But that was like out of character. In character, we had no idea what was going on. In the crossfire, White Scarf and the former mayor were both killed, so the respawn would cause further problems. Civvies surrendered to Commander Ben knowing they were outgunned. We explained we didn't want the fight, released the scav prisoners, and put the live civvies in their jail. Seth, Ben, and I discussed how to play this. We didn't want to hold down the town ourselves until the Yellow Invaders arrived. Seth and I didn't even know we could trust Yellow yet, so we agreed to instill a new democracy and leave. We'd go to the hill the opposite of the town, wait for Yellow to arrive, then react as we need to, if we need to, whatever. Ben held a vote for an interim president while White Scarf respawned. We left, and there was once again peace for a time. This peace, in this time, Seth and I explained that we didn't trust Blackbeard. But Ben had gained intel that lent credence to Blackbeard's claims. The scavs had their hands on a nuke. Yes, a nuke. But it needed an activation key. But Ben didn't know for sure, but according to the scav scouts he ran into, Yellow had the activation key, but they wouldn't admit it openly to the scavs. And they were trying to build up trust. Invaders and scavs were still trying to see who they could trust, and they wanted to take the town together as a show of good faith that they could work together in a coalition. Ben's theory was that Yellow had a key, but had no intention of giving it to the scavs. Yellow wanted the deterrence of the nuke for themselves, and that made sense. Ben wanted us to be on the winning side with the nuke rather than try and take it and destroy the key. Too risky, right? In time, Yellow and a handful of scavs attacked the town. We sat by and did nothing, and after a long, protracted battle, Yellow, with the assist from the scavs, a handful of them, not a lot of them, Yellow won. We entered the town peacefully, and Ben entered talks with Comrade Yellow. Ben wanted the confirmation about the nuke situation, and Comrade Yellow wanted us to do a job for trust first. This communist government was very big on trust. We negotiated out that we all wanted Yellow's death cards, any cards that that Yellow collected off of Whites or scavs or whoever else. Then we would do the job. So the same standard deal that we had with White at the beginning of the game that was working out well for us, that went south because we saw that White was going to lose. In the battle, White retreated to a position that cut off the scavs from getting back in the town. This was when the protracted battle was happening. This was why their defense forces were weakened. Not all the Whites were up there. Now, White had probably moved on by now, but the Yellow Commander wanted us to escort this 3 scavs back to their allies. Yellow had some sort of agreement with scavs to keep them out of the town, but work with Yellow, the Yellow invading army for the time being. We didn't know the full deets. We just knew the job. We were supposed to escort these scavs back to their allies. On the way, we got ambushed by scavs on a cliff, and the scavs we were escorting turned on us. it sucked ass, and that was the first time I died in the game. I ended up going 2-2. I killed 2 people, died twice. I was happy with that. We lost the same number of cards that we gained out of it, but got out of the situation through sheer numbers and medical supplies. We should have known not to get tied up with scavs in any way, but the political climate was hospitable to strange alliances. Upon returning to the town, Ben grilled Commander Yellow on the betrayal. Commander Yellow proved that he didn't know about the planned scav betrayal by offering information we wanted and more. It became very clear that this relationship between Yellow Invaders and scavs was very strained, and again, the whole details of like them taking the town, but the scavs weren't allowed in it, even though they were helping. All of that was, proof that their relationship was it was tenuous. So Comrade Yellow proved that he had the key. He said he had the key. He showed us it. And he did indeed want the nuke out of the hands of the crazy, immoral scavs. He offered a standard fee for cooperation, all the enemy cards in exchange for busting up the scavs, and a coordinated effort. Here we're approaching the end of the game. The rest of the story was pretty simple, or the story arc. Yellow moved in on the low ground, where we had moved in before, to the scav base, with Commander Yellow asking to talk about the civvies with the scavs. He promised important info. We came around back in a classical pincer move and got on top of the scavs. Yellow pointed guns at us to deceive the scavs, and they weren't actually shooting at us. And they turned on the scav leader, or rather, they turned on them once we found the scav leader. We found the scav leader up on the hill. Commander Ben himself shot down the scav leader and jacked the nuke. Ben, by cover of the cliff, told us to back off from the firefight, and we snuck away and hid the nuke with a few cards we had earned from the exchange. So that's where the story arc ends, with whites totally wiped the fuck out and demoralized a lot of the white players, outside of the game, outside of character, were super pissed about how buttfuck they got the whole game. Their democracy was a constant mindfuck. Red was too afraid to take the town, and they had no bargaining chips. Mercs had successfully denuked their part of the Wasteland, and Yellow maintained control of the town. These events happen twice a year. Patreon willing, hopefully I can get a knockoff GoPro at some point in the next 6 months, whenever the next one of these happens. I would like to go to it again. This was a great event, and recounting everything that happened, the game runners really planned out a lot of events. I'll end by saying this. It came to light that Blackbeard was just stirring the pot because his character was trying to make money through arms deals and everything, so everything that was happening along the way was him pulling the strings. White Scarf being, he was whispering in White Scarf's ear, telling him to usurp the former mayor of the civvies. He was behind the rogue state, Yellow invading army, acting the way they were. He was behind the scav ambush and a whole bunch of other shit that didn't affect us directly. He was the one pulling the strings and fucking us all along. The information about the ace up the sleeve with the yellows and the scavs was true. They did indeed have a nuke, and they were trying to work that out. But that didn't mean that he wasn't full of shit and trying to capitalize. Man, that was a fun story. I hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as I enjoyed recounting it. I have just bowed out. I'm exhausted, and so I'm just helping clean up so we can get out of here quicker when it's time to actually leave. The game is still going on, and there are further plot developments. It's been a dramatic day.